Welcome back to the Papers Podcast, where we look at all the world's health professions education literature and bring it to you every week. My name's Jason Frank. I'm back with the usual crazy people. Welcome, John.
Hi, Jason. Hi, everyone.
John's still in his octopi shirt in this session, and it's a little bit disturbing. Welcome, Lava.
Hi, everybody.
And Linda's got a paper today. Take it away, Linda.
Hi, everybody. I'll start by just saying that there's a lot of reasons that we choose articles that we are going to review on this podcast, or articles to read in general. We've discussed many of them on this podcast. One that I don't think has been mentioned so far is finding an article because we're cited, and it comes up in one of the citation platforms that we get notified about. Am I the only one that checks out papers when I see that something has said, hey, you're cited in this? I see shrugs. Well, what happened with this one was I found citations of a couple of articles in two different areas, so it piqued my curiosity on this one. The other thing is I did choose this paper as it was from a non-Euro-American context and trying to spread out the kinds of papers we read. The paper is by Deanna Weiching-Lee and colleagues. It's called How Community and Organizational Culture Interact and Affect Senior Clinician-Educator Identity. It's in Medical Teacher. It was released online October 9th, 2023. So how do we get to be who we are as educators? What are the enablers? What are the barriers? How do personal, relational, and organizational factors impact on the formation of senior clinician educators? No, ladies and gentlemen, I use the gentleman term loosely, I am not having an existential crisis. This is a paper about professional identity, something I'm quite interested in. So professional identity is how we view ourselves and how our behavior aligns with the norms of the profession. And that identity influences everything we do, our well-being, our productivity. Now, one of my identities is that of a clinician educator, and I guess I've been around long enough, you could call me a senior clinician educator. And John and Jason and I have actually defined this something like a clinician in practice, training in education, applies theory to practice, in education, is a consultant in education to others, and participates in education, scholarship, and or leadership. Now, to do that, you need a pretty strong clinician educator identity. It's pretty crucial for advancing the quality of medical education at our schools. But I will say that the obverse, there's a word for you, not opposite, but obverse is true. If you don't have a strong identity, perhaps education doesn't get advanced as well. So John and Jason, I'm not going to ask you if you're clinician educators. I know you are. But I'm going to ask you, how was your clinician educator identity formed? Were there factors involved in it? Did it just happen? I'll go John, Jason.
I don't think at any point did someone hand me the decoder ring and a special business card that said that. I think I was also a generation where the phenomenon of being a clinician educator, at least in the way that you've defined it, Linda, was not as common. And so the three of us did that initial study, and we worked on a number of initiatives, including a national curriculum and certification for becoming a clinician educator, and a number of forums for clinician educators to gather. So we were very early days, or at least in Canada, we were very early days. And although the term might have been thrown around in the literature, it was used with an imprecision, probably talking about physicians who were practicing in academia. So it was nascent, and it was grassroots, and it slowly developed. And I don't think I would have ever labeled myself until we started to have a kind of a community of people and say, what is it about my academic practice, my practice in the clinical realm, my teaching practice, the scholarship that I'm producing, and where I'm called on to be a consultant to answer educational problems? Did we ever kind of collectively say that's a different type of archetype than others, the education researcher or the clinical teacher? And I think it's slowly developed. Every now and then, though, I look at this point in my career and say, what's the identity that I want to hold on to most? And for a while, I was apologetic to be a clinician educator, but I'm quite pleased to call myself one now because I see colleagues who are just really fantastic in this world. And you always want to be associated with people that are exciting and amazing and are doing interesting things. And I think that community has grown, and I'm quite pleased to be a clinician educator, whereas in the early days, I'd be like, I don't really know what to call myself.
I think that's fair. For me, it was role modeling, mentors, and being a rebel. And so I had wonderful people in my developmental years as a medical student. Victor Neufeld, Jeff Turnbull, José Labrosse, Pierre Jean, people who are giants in health professions education. And they really instilled in me an identity that involves service. So it's all about the patients. That it involves chops, so that there are some things about being an educator that is some skills we have, and that led to our paper years later. And just the joy of being part of a community that kind of is there to shake things up and change things. I just want to note that my identity as a clinician educator is distinct in me from being a clinician teacher. And in the paper you're about to introduce, Linda, I think it's blurred.
Yeah, I'll agree to that. And but I think many people do not make that distinction, even in some of the previous papers we've reviewed between the two. So Jason and John, you've both, if we took out the word clinician educator and just left in the word professional identity, that would fit with some of the models that we know about the socialization of somebody into the profession. The authors here ask how a CE, or in fact a senior CE identity, is formed. And they speak a lot about the organizational factors that may facilitate or hamper clinician educator identity formation. They actually really concentrate on the organizational aspects, perhaps to diminish some of the other potential aspects. Now, we spoke on a recent podcast about how organization leaders do or don't value clinician educators. So maybe that is important to talk about organizations. But we all know we wear many hats as a CE. John has just come back from a clinical shift. We have leadership hats and teaching hats and whatever. And those conflicting sometimes roles, certainly they conflict in terms of time, may impede clinician educator identity formation. The authors claim that they know a little about these enablers and constraints, and that we know even less about it in non-Western cultures and countries where, as they put it, culture, values, resources, and awareness of identity formation may differ. The authors have a whole section called Theoretical Framework. And when I read through it, it looks like a lit review. But Lara, I'd like your comments about whether they are actually using a theoretical framework here.
Oh, thanks, Linda. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that they are. What they list under theoretical framework, as you aptly point out, is a list. They list one theory about the personal and the social aspects of PIF, and they describe some previous research, but they don't describe how these literatures informed their interview protocol. They say it did, but they don't tell me how. They don't talk about how the theory was brought to life in the study. They just sort of put it there. So unfortunately, without that content shaping or informing or somehow being part of the underpinnings of the study itself, I'm not sure we could call it a theoretical framework.
Yeah, it was a bit of a concern. I was really looking for a theory in here and didn't actually find it. They did, however, have a research question, and that is, how do community and organizational factors interact and affect senior clinician educator identity formation in an Asian academic medical center? Well, that sort of focuses down a bit, not only in terms of the context, but in fact, they actually say they're looking at community and organizational factors, even though the literature that they quote, some of which I know fairly well, is actually talking about way more than that, and the things that Jason John mentioned, like role modeling and such like. So what did they do? They did one-on-one interviews, and there's a little paragraph talking about the study design and research method, an exploratory grounded in the constructivist paradigm to examine the phenomenology of CEIF of senior clinician educators.
It just seems like a bit of a mishmash.
Yeah.
It's like throwing a bunch of qualitative words. I had trouble following their logic.
Well, I got to say, this paragraph sounds like it was not written by the same author that wrote the rest of it. It's I'm wondering if they use their methodologist to write this paragraph. I don't know. I had trouble putting it together. We'll talk about it when we get to speak about the methods. They did do purposeful sampling, and they recruited 11 participants from varied backgrounds in an academic health center, and they had to have 3 of 5 things, which I think is actually pretty good. Their inclusion criteria were they had to be senior clinicians, fairly senior, 25 years of experience. They had to have a senior faculty appointment, formal training in health professions education, a leadership role in education for 5 years, and recipient of teaching awards. They then say, when they had these people, the interview questions were informed by 2 papers. Now, I happen to know one paper very well and the other paper somewhat, and I had trouble linking their interview questions, which were relatively generic, with what was being said in these papers. And the interview questions were, in fact, how do you describe yourself? How did you get into your role? What are your experiences? What are the factors? How has your institution influenced that? Some of them were somewhat leading questions. They described the coding, and they had and that's all I'm going to say about that. And then they had a very interesting sentence. All investigators kept their own reflexivity diary throughout the process. That's the only thing I heard about reflexivity. So I guess my question to any of you, one can answer is this a reflexivity statement?
They do describe who they are and where they came from. I mean, it's towards a reflexivity statement. They don't give much about the depth of their experiences or their stance.
Any other comments on methodology, Lara, John?
I would like to suggest, so the authors describe it in their method section. One of the first sentences they write or the second sentence, the phenomenology study design describes the core commonality and lived-in structured experiences of our SEC-CEIF. I'm afraid that I'm going to need to suggest, I don't think that they actually did phenomenology. I think I appreciate they get my bonus mark for telling me their paradigmatic orientation. So thank you for that. But I'm afraid that the way they describe their methods, the more I read it, and I read it a couple of times, I think they did thematic analysis. And actually their results read like thematic analysis as well. So I understand why they wanted to turn to phenomenology. And because in many introductory books and articles about qualitative research, they'll say if you want to understand lived experience, you need to do phenomenology. But here's the thing. The term lived experience means something really specific in phenomenology. And I won't go into it in too much depth here, but I'm doing a great paper with Rola Ajawi, Mark Behrman, Bridget O'Brien, and Victoria Luong about the concept of lived experience. And it really is about that direct, unmediated experience before we even put words to it, what it means. And while I think these authors may have wanted to get to that, I think the way their study is designed, I'm going to suggest that they might think about whether they should think about describing the work in terms of thematic analysis instead.
I'll share some of the concerns already articulated and add a new twist to this, which is I didn't get the who cares argument that they're trying to build. What is it about a senior clinician educator? And notably, they don't actually define what a clinician educator is. I guess their inclusion criteria is their definition, but I'll foreshadow that none of their included participants actually have formal education. And that's probably a function of the generational piece. There probably wasn't a lot of availability of formal education at that time. But they don't define what a clinician educator is. We have to assume what it is. And I'm not sure if I would agree with the same definition, but whatever it is. But why are we so interested in senior clinician educators? And then what does the transfer of their findings outside of Singapore, which is a very specific context, mean to me as a reader? So you'll need to unpack that a little bit for me. And, it's interesting. If you want to think about a professional identity formation, we're talking a very, 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 very niche identity here. And there's almost like this idea of survivor bias. I wonder what it's like to be somebody who's 25 years plus in practice, who has survived to this point. That's a very unusual phenomenon. I would love to hear the people that it's a much more who cares question when you want to understand what that looks like. But that's not how the study is designed for. And I'm trying not to be reviewer two, which is critiquing their method to say you should have done a different study. I'm just not pulled into the who cares part of this study yet.
So when I read this, I cared enough because we all know that there are struggles for clinician educators worldwide. Because of my own lens that separates CEs from clinician teachers, I really struggled about who they were talking about all through this paper because it seems like it's a mishmash of both. And I also keyed on their inclusion criteria, John, where senior clinician with 25 years experience, for me, is a different species than somebody who has a leadership role in education or different than somebody who's a recipient of a teaching award necessarily. I just felt like I was kind of like they threw a bunch of different people in a study. And so I was confused about what they were really trying to do when I read through the methods.
So and they don't really explain. We know that none of them had formal training in HPE. I'm assuming that most of them had senior faculty appointments and were senior clinicians. So that really leaves them with either a leadership role or a teaching award. So you're right, we can't really tell. And maybe there's actually two sets of people in here.
Or more.
Yeah, or more. Let's look a little bit at the results. And I must say, in a way, I was disappointed, not with the actual results, but I think I'd expected more or different. And I was hoping for more or different that maybe would help me explain my existential crisis that I'd say I'm not having. They did mention the factors influencing the development of a CE's professional identity had 3 domains, and each of the factors has strengthening or containing or constraining influences on the growth of identity, and all the factors interacted with each other. So those 3 were relational, organizational, and then the crossing over of those 2 was personal. So relational was things like being strengthened by community of practice, mentors, patients, students. Organizational, the physical facilities, faculty development. And then there were some that really constrained identity development, such as family, the industrialization of medical education, and to some extent gender. And those all crossed over with that person who had a passion, an interest, who could imagine a trajectory as a CE, and who had certain professional values. And again, was constrained by lack of interest and lack of time. I'm not sure that's anything new. There were links between the 3 domains. Did it really help me link it to the frameworks of the socialization frameworks? Could I take this and then try and put it into a schema that already exists? I'm not sure I really could, to be honest. So that's one of the problems with this. What the authors concluded was that, and I quote, strong relationships enhanced or enabled clinician educator identity formation. Organizational culture was a barrier and can hinder it. And I think we have to add in the cultural differences that might be seen in Asia, like hierarchy and respect for leaders that might be a barrier. building a formal community of practice is vital. And Jason, John, I think we three were at the beginning of that. We may not have had, so we had to build our own community. It's vital for clinician educators to grow. And the idea of promoting role models for young faculty and doing faculty development may empower educators. Now, any factors before we go on to the conclusions and comments here? Jason, John, Lara?
I think this paper has value. It's another example of a phenomenon that I think is global, where people who are both clinicians and involved in education feel they have a bit of a Rodney Dangerfield effect. Like they just feel like they get no respect. You know what I mean? And this is another one of those papers that document that. That wasn't a joke. It's actually called that. I'm giving these thumbs down from Lara and John.
It's a known phenomenon, Lara.
Thank you, Linda. Anyway, so I think this is a paper it's a bit of a call to arms, and it might be in context. Like maybe this paper was inspired by the local frustrations, and now the paper sort of hands it over to leadership decision makers and says, hey, like we have a problem. And if you really care about this aspect of our mission, we are a medical school, maybe we should invest in this. I think that has value. I agree with you, Linda, that the findings, didn't hear any new stories. I did hear a new context. And I think there was a thread about all these people being very senior.
I think the findings here are very niche. And the argument, I guess, is they have a sample of 11. After purposefully sampling, they achieve what they describe as saturation. I won't get hung up on that terminology. And I guess it's because they have a very small sample of people that see the same world quickly. I just wonder how purposefully did they consider contradictory or different orthogonal viewpoints to include in this analysis. And so they say we want to be different than all the other work that's gone around professional identity formation that the results seem to kind of mimic by saying we want to really focus on the community and the organizational factors. And then right immediately they talk about personal features, and they don't really actually dig into the organizational and social elements in a really important way. As an example, the issue of gender gets 2 sentences in a manuscript of like 3,500 plus words, and it never gets dug into. You're like, wow, I want to really hear what's happening to these senior leaders, and nothing happens there. I almost thought you're baiting me a little, Linda, with the figure, because it's a case study of how not to do a figure. It's a 2-circle Venn diagram with some words that are underneath it, and the relationships are presumably found by the different fonts. I can make heads nor tails of what it means. It doesn't stand alone and add any nuance in terms of the interplay of ideas and themes. But I don't find here anything that's new, except to say that in a very specific niche world, there are probably some things that validate your experience, and you probably see yourself here. I just don't know how I'm going to transfer that back to a wider context for me into a clinician educator population that's not super senior.
So the only thing that I would add to this conversation, and I won't repeat anything that my colleagues have said, but one thing I think that we need to pay attention to is that what these findings tell us is that if there's a lack of institutional value for the work that you do, then that has impact on your identity as a professional in that space. See, and I have this theory that one day somewhere, a really forward-thinking entrepreneurial leader is going to recognize that if they double down on education and really support that mission, that students are going to vote with their feet, because students are really smart, and so are faculty. And if that entrepreneurial leader says, I'm going to make this the best educational space possible, they will attract learners who are really interested in getting the best skills and becoming the most skilled, the ones who are hungry to be excellent clinicians. And they're going to attract the best clinician educators. And that medical school or academic teaching hospital is going to propel themselves to the front line of the reputation race, or whatever ranking system you happen to believe in, because they'll have the best graduates moving into practice and the best educators who will stay at that institution because their work is valued. Learners are smart. And one day, a brave and forward-thinking leader is going to recognize that if they really push on education, then they will get the best of the best and the rest will take care of itself.
Well, wow. Thank you for that, Lara.
Amen. Preach.
Yeah.
Start up the choir.
So, and I think we addressed this in one of our podcasts a couple of months ago about leaders who do value education and educators. But let's go back to this paper now. Go for our methods first. I'll go John, Jason, Lara.
I'm reminded of Lara's concern about a mixing of terminology and approach, but I do think they tried to be systematic. I do think they tried to be rigorous. And in that, I'm going to give it a 3. I'm going to be sympathetic.
I'm going to give it a 3 as well. It has some attempts at rigor, as John said, but some confusion about the methodology. So I give it a 3.
So unfortunately, I'm going to end up giving it a 2. 1, and that includes my bonus mark for paradigmatic orientation mention. So it's a 2.
Okay, so that you took off 1 from what would have been a 3, I guess. I think they tried. I think I'd just leave it as a 3. And Jason's telling me to hurry up, so I'll hurry up.
No, it was the other way around. She was going to give it a 1, but she gave it a bonus mark. So she was even harsher than you thought.
Oh, I didn't get that.
All good, Linda. Let's go on to impact, I'm sure.
Let's go backwards for our highly validated rating scale. We'll go Lava, Jason, John.
So I'm going to give it a 3. I think this is I think there was some insight provided here into a context that we don't usually hear from. And I think that's an important contribution. So I'm going to give it a 3.
I struggle with this one. I'm not sure how I'll use this. So I really am sort of stuck, but I want to give whole numbers because I don't want to be like Lara. So I'm going to give this a 2.
I'm going to give it a 2 as well, in the sense that for me, as a non-senior clinician educator, I don't see the immediate transfer of a lot of this. Some of the other references that they provide are helpful here. But I think if you are a senior clinician educator working in a context similar to Singapore, you're going to find some value there. But it's just, I guess I'm reacting to the niche part. So in my alternate universe thing, 2 for the universe that I live in, maybe a 3 for a different universe where I'm a senior clinician educator.
Never again am I taking grief. Ever.
Well, I decided you don't listen to me, so I might as well.
No, I don't.
You can't beat him, join him is my new thing.
Love
First
it.
of
Welcome
all,
to the dark side, Luke.
I'm gonna give John personally a rating of 1 because he doesn't think he's a senior clinician educator. I'm sorry, John. It's not
John's
just the number of years or the gray hair. You're a senior clinician educator.
I'm just immature, and so I don't have gravitas. That's really what I'm reacting to.
I'll agree to that. I'm going to give this a 3 because I'm like Lara. I think I'm looking at the big picture here, and I think there are some little nuggets that can be taken out of here. Anyway, that's it. Looking at ourselves to some extent as clinician educators, or for some of us, senior clinician educators. If you disagree with us, or more importantly, if you agree with us, please let us know. You can reach us at thepaperspodcast.com, or I screwed it up again, didn't I?
That's 100% wrong.
You can reach us at Papers Podcast when you would look for us on the internet, or you can email us at thepaperspodcast@gmail.com.
Thanks so much, Lara. We'll get it right after 2 or 3 years.
Eventually, it's all good.
And let's just sign this one off.
Take care, everybody. It's not what I get to say. Is that
Why?
mine? I know. Whoops. Oh, and you spilled your coffee.
Damn it. Violence over here.
Talk to you later.
My telomeres can only take so much. It can only take so much.
But I got the email
We've been
address
doing this
right.
for 10 plus years.
I got the email
Come on
address
now.
right. Talk to you later.
Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to the Papers Podcast. We hope we made you just slightly smarter. The podcast is a production of the Unit for Teaching and Learning at the Karolinska Institutet. The executive producer today was my friend Teresa Sörö. The technical producer today was Samuel Lundberg. You can learn more about the Papers Podcast and contact us at www.thepaperspodcast.com. Thank you for listening, everybody, and thank you for all you do. Take care.